Hello and welcome to Bennett's Bike Social and to another episode of our Better Riding series powered by Honda Motorcycles UK, the series where we give you lots of tips and advice on how you can ride your motorbike better. And joining me, as always, is our expert motorbike coach, Mr. Mark McVeigh. Here he is.
G'day, Michael. How are you going there today?
Fab, thank you. I've not melted yet. It's roasty toasty over here in the UK, Mark. How are you, mate?
Yeah, we're wet. Rain, but anyway, it's all good.
I think on the balance of things, Australia has the better weather. There's no competition. All right,
Yep.
sir. What are we learning about today, Mr. McVeigh?
Yep, episode 29, blending your motorcycle controls.
Blending? Nothing to do with making cakes, is it? What? Go on. What's blending?
Well, it's kind of overlapping your controls. So if you think about, your transition from the throttle to the brake, and that's one example, where you can keep your tires loaded and your geometry in the sweet spot, if you like. But blending controls, it's an advanced skill. It's not a strategy for regular traffic. A better way to understand your motorbike and explore its grip limits. You improve your smoothness and your precision, but in a controlled environment.
So it's part of your riding system, your training system, machine control training, right?
Yeah, exactly. So those three pillars, the skill is the machine control element. How closely can you match the performance of your bike, and you do that in the controlled environment, like the car park or the training range. And just like the police motocana, these guys, they don't like ride like this on the road. But they train like this to build their skills, and then they can call on those skills when they need them. That's the key thing. And of course, whenever you're doing this kind of blending, you're not coasting, and which is obviously a part of, riding safely on the road. And this type of blending, it's really about developing control and feel. So when you have those extra skills up your sleeve when you need them.
Yeah, I understand. I understand the sort of the high level benefits of machine control, but what does blending look like at a riding level?
Yeah, well, every input you make, you're on the throttle, the brake, or steering, you're kind of shifting that weight around. And if we look at this animation, we'll kind of just let it run through, and then we'll play it back. But you can see that kind of weight shifting back and forward in the bike as it corners. So we just drag this back. At this phase here, it's under acceleration. So when you apply the throttle, even if it's neutral or accelerating slightly, the weight goes to the back, and it kind of comes off the front to a degree. And then the rider, before they enter the corner, they're braking. Then you can see now the weight shifts to the front of the tire, the front of the bike, and it comes off the rear. And then as the rider kind of enters the corner, it's more like a kind of neutral throttle, and generally you'll get a 50 weight distribution on the bike. So it's really important, to kind of understand those elements. And then, when you go to ride on the road, that's something, just to consider. But we're deliberately, on these drills and practicing in the controlled environment, and using those figure eights. And that's really how you can feel exactly, how that weight moves, how the suspension responds, how the grip changes. And, that level of understanding pays dividends later. Even if you rarely ride this way outside of the training.
Brilliant. So in that figure of eight video there, where I'm on the Honda, you can see me blending the front brake with so rolling the throttle and just before it's off, just with the front brake.
Yeah, well, what you're doing here is you're kind of trail braking, so you're blending. If you look there, you can see your hands on the brake, and then you've got steering in, so you're actually trail braking a little bit there. So you're blending your controls, the front brake with the steering, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Does that come naturally, do you think? Is that still part of this training, I suppose?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was kind of what we were focusing on, and it's really important, that you've got your lever set up properly, that's kind of one of those things that you don't really notice until you do this kind of training. And, we use that kind of over grip method, where you rotate your throttle hand slightly forward. And it basically allows you to use the throttle while keeping your finger on the brake. And of course, that reduces reaction time, allows you to transition between the throttle and brake kind of, instantly. And, most modern brakes are so powerful, it's even one finger is enough.
Yeah, they're so powerful, aren't they? You often talk about 1G of grip, but so kind of bringing it back to basics, blending, the word blending, you're talking about overlapping controls to the benefit of smooth riding.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, it's, like we said, it's like the police moto kind of in the controlled environment. And we've got a little bit of kind of, this is data, but kind of simplified. Data can often look very messy, but this is really simplified. So if you look at, this is the control input, and, green is throttle, and then you've got the red as the brake. So, you come off the throttle, but before the throttle's completely off, you're on the brake. And then the same thing again, you apply your brake pressure, and then before you're completely off the brake, then you're applying the throttle, just that initial bit of pressure there. So that's kind of what it would look, from a data point of view. And what it really does is kind of stops the chassis, floating around. It keeps things loaded, and gives you that kind of feedback from your tires.
Yeah, it makes the whole process of riding or transitioning smoother and more gentle, I guess, on you and the rider, but also the bike as well. I think it's more, there's more finesse, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. Finesse is the key word here. And especially if you think about, if you apply too much throttle against too much front brake, that can be a bit crazy. I remember we used to demonstrate front wheel skids doing that, but not for the faint of heart. But we see it actually in emergency stops. And it can cause, not in this one because it's perfectly demonstrated by yourself, but a lot of emergency stops with the rider even though they know what's coming up, and this is training, over 10,000 riders. We mentioned that before. Often the rider still has some state of panic, and they'll go do the emergency stop, but they've kind of still got a bit of throttle on, and it's really because they haven't practiced before. So we kind of advocate for those riders, pull the clutch in during their emergency stop while they're developing that technique, because we don't want to, you can get chatter, and you can crash as well. You're trying to drive the bike with the throttle against the front brake. So while they're developing that technique, we say, hey, just whip the clutch in if you kind of feel that happening. And often, we'll stand there with the rider, and the bike's, clutch is in and the bike's revving, and they kind of don't actually know what's going on. And these are all post-licensed riders, so it's important just to practice that technique.
Because blending controls isn't necessarily something you're going to go automatically do as soon as you get your license or as soon as you pass your CBT. It's just it's a skill that will come over time with more hunger for understanding the bike, understanding what that blending controls does and the benefits that it has, rather than just get on a bike and riding it and being a bit choppy.
Yeah, 100%. It's about, and often, we see it in the comments, people are asking and they're curious, right? And that's what this is about. It's about curiosity and developing feel. This is not just a skill for like the racetrack or anything. So, practice it where, you can make the mistakes, car park, close range, until you can kind of feel that difference, between the bike when it's calm and you can start feeling that grip. And of course, it's not just, 20 hours to get your license, it's thousands of hours to mastery, and this is just one of those drills to practice for the mastery.
Mark, we've often talked about trail braking, and we've had an episode dedicated to it, which was like a red rag, wasn't it, to those who like commenting on YouTube. But trail braking, is that a skill that is a really good example of blending controls?
Yeah, 100%. So you could say trail braking is kind of the ultimate blending of controls. And let's refresh what the definition is. It's basically you're carrying some front brake pressure into the corner and then releasing that brake pressure gradually as your lean angle increases. So you're taking away, brake as you add lean. That's the key thing. And as we've said in the past, every rider should be able to trail brake. It's an advanced skill, but it's not necessarily a strategy for every rider to use on the road. So that's, really important. Again, it's one of these things to practice in a controlled environment. When I'm riding, I trail brake all the time. But, there's a riding fundamentals that you should be able, stop in the distance you can see in your line, all those things that come into it. So it really is a kind of advanced skill, and a skill to have up your sleeve as well. But we'll bring up this animation and run it through, and this, kind of explains the key thing about, the blending, if you like. So we'll just let that run through, and then we'll bring it back and talk about it in a bit more detail. So obviously we're here approaching the corner, and then you can see on the top left there you've got so kind of G's. You're applying the brakes. You can see here we're starting to get a bit of deceleration, so that's braking coming in. And then as we're a little bit of trail braking, you're starting to lean the bike. So this is blending now. You've got braking and you've got cornering kind of happening at the same time, and it's not very there's not a lot of force there. Like this is kind of on the outside is 1G. So, it's like 0.25, like a quarter of the grip of the tire. So it's very calm, and, this corner's clear and open. So it's, safe to do it there. And you can see then the trail braking here, the maximum kind of cornering as you meet the apex, and then you start accelerating. So this is the acceleration phase here. So now you're blending throttle while you take away the lean angle, and then you're accelerating, taking the lean angle out, and then accelerate away. So that's, really good definition of blending. And of course, police riders know this. That's why they do the figure 8 drills. They can repeat them endlessly. They're balancing that brake and throttle until it all feels second nature.
Is there a way of the blending controls helps on the road? Is there anything else that you can perhaps talk about there?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing is kind of, covering your brake. If you think about if you're not covering your front brake and you see a hazard, and then you got to kind of move your fingers and then squeeze and then stop. Whereas if you're covering the brake, basically, as soon as you see the hazard, you're starting to squeeze, right? So, you can easily save, split second time on that. Say you saved like 0.3 of a second. Well, if you're doing, 35, say, mile an hour, that's kind of 5 meters less stopping distance. And if it was 60 miles an hour, it's about 8 meters. So that's a whole car length. Right. And that's the difference between a scare and a crash. And, because you're practiced, you're used to modulating that lever, you progressively squeeze, you've got a high rate of application, but, you're giving the ABS the best chance to work, so it doesn't, trigger, or, if you don't have ABS, lock that front up.
Yeah, exactly. So go on then, let's move on to the drills then, because there must be some way, some means, some drills that you can recommend to practice blending controls, right?
The first drill is really sit on the bike, okay? And it's really basic, and we showed that earlier. Sit on the bike, practice with the lever, rehearse, focus on the smoothness and the kind of feel, if you like. Very, very basic, but really important, just thing to practice. And then the second drill is those figure 8s. We just love the figure 8s, so you can set up a couple of cones or chalk marks, or, the figure 8 in a little bit more detail. And then really it's just about practicing. We encourage riders to kind of challenge themselves in 5% steps. So, have a ride around, and then start thinking about, okay, maybe I'll brake, 5% later. So you practice that, and until it becomes comfortable and intuitive. Okay, that's kind of like your new level. And then you might go, okay, well, let me, brake 5% harder, and you practice that until it's, comfortable and intuitive. So, every rider's different. And it's just really important to, practice that until it's consistent and intuitive. They're the key things. And then when you're on the road, that kind of, those reactions and controls kind of automatic then. And then my favorite drill is the trail brake drill. So, we got the circle. And again, that kind of 15%, especially in the front brake, 5%, that especially in the front brake, a lot of people are really afraid of the front brake. And if we just roll this back a little bit to here, and the same thing applies, have a think about your control speed. So, you're approaching the circle, and then you'll apply your brake. So think about where you brake, and then start braking a little bit lighter each time, and then start, carrying a little bit of brake into the turn. And of course, if you run on, it's not the end of the world. We're on a car park in a circle. So, the key thing, don't fear the front brake. It's not a trap. It's kind of like a volume knob with, that kind of adjustment. So, cover your brake and get comfortable with it, and practice in that controlled environment.
That's really interesting. And I was just thinking that throughout this entire series, you got to remember that we're all different riders. We're all at a different stage through our motorcycling journey. We've all got different amounts of training, experience. We ride different bikes 100%. On different roads. So there's no kind of one set of goals or one set of tips or advice that fits all. It's all about, like you say, getting comfortable with it and training and learning and really understanding what your bike can do. But Mark, we've talked a lot, haven't we? And there's a lot of information for something that, in theory, on paper, is relatively simple, but every little tip is very important to remember. So can you summarize it? That's what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, well, I guess, think about, you're adjusting your lever so you can get a finger on it, and control the throttle. So that over grip, get that comfortable and repeatable. And then, during the practice drills, the goal is to do no coasting. So either be on the throttle or the brake. That's the goal. And of course, it could take you a week. It took a month, years to get to that. That's a lot of skill. But, that's practice makes perfect. And then trail braking wise, the brake, release tapers off. That's the key thing. So as you add lean angle, taper, release that front brake pressure, and practice in that controlled space, the figure eight, the cones, the car park. You look at the police and the skills that these guys have on their big Hondas. Blending controls. It's not about, pushing limits on the public roads. It's about building that skill pillar of machine control mastery, and where it's safe to explore in that controlled environment. And, like the police, then you can take that confidence to the road, knowing that you have that extra skill set up your sleeve if you ever need it.
We record another series, don't we, called Rate My Ride. And we have one particular riding example of where a fella goes up the inside of a car and overtakes it.
Yes.
On a corner. And it's seemingly, according to all of the YouTube comments and according to your expertise, that, the whole planning of the overtake and the overtake itself was well carried out. But someone made a comment on YouTube that what if you were the driver and you don't know how good that motorcycle rider is? And actually, and it's fairly relevant to what those Japanese motorcycle riders, of course, they don't ride like that on the road, but what if they did? It'd be hilarious, because they know that they are in complete control. But us, if we were not a motorcyclist, we were sitting in a car watching the guys going like this, you'd think, oh my gosh, they're going to crash, they're crazy, they can't ride. But it's often about interpretation.
Absolutely.
Mark.
Absolutely. You don't want to startle the motorists. And, we've all got a duty to, respect motorcycling and uphold, the code of motorcycling, do what's best for motorcycling. So, yeah, I'm a big one for that. Think about the other people and how it affects them. It might be an older person. You might give them a bit of a scare.
We don't want to upset anybody else on the road, do we? We do enough of that already. Mark, what are we going to be talking about next time in the next episode?
Yeah, well, episode 30, which is kind of cool. And, that ties in with Mr. McGuinness 30 Isle of Man TTs, which is pretty cool. And the other thing is that this episode is how track riding can improve your road riding. So it's quite a funny timing on that one.
Yeah, ideal. Yeah, we're recording this just as the TT practice week gets underway. And yeah, of course, John McGuinness MBE, 30 years at the TT. That's quite a feat, isn't it?
It is.
Brilliant.
Amazing.
All right, Mark, I'll let you crack on and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you, mate.
No worries. Cheers, Michael.
So just before I leave you, I'm just going to leave you with a couple of other things. We'd say a big thank you to Honda Motorcycles UK for getting behind this project and allowing us to make these episodes for you to learn how to be a better rider. In the meantime, don't forget to check out all of the other episodes in the series. I'll put a playlist link in the comment section below and also probably in the description as well. But you can also post your comments, your questions, your concerns, even if you've got any in the YouTube comments. We'll get back to you. We'll try and do our best to answer as many as we can. You can also do the same over at Bennett's Bike Club. There's over 2,500 members in there already. There's a whole host of other proper, actual experts as well as loads of other members. It's all about the conversation and trying to, learn. And there's also an opportunity to become a BikeSocial member, which entitles you to access up to 300 different motorcycle apparel, clothing, training discounts. Just search BikeSocial membership. Thanks for getting this far. See you next time. Honda Motorcycles are supporting this series because safety is one of their key business pillars, and their quest for safety inspires their innovations in products, technology, and education, which is why they're committed to achieving zero traffic fatalities involving Honda mobility products worldwide by 2050.